Welcome to the Theology Pugcast. It's great to have you here for this special episode. We've got a special guest. Someone will have introduced himself in a moment, but I'm C.R. Wiley. I'm a pastor, and I serve a church in the Pacific Northwest. I've written a number of things. My most recent book is In the House of Tom Bombadil, and I'm a senior editor at Touchstone Magazine, and so is our guest. But anyway, Tom.
I'm Tom Price. I love Touchstone Magazine. I teach theology, Christian ethics at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, and teach philosophy as well at a couple other schools. So I teach, I do some writing, some speaking, and I'm one of the triad of this pugcast. So I want to add that to my credential here.
All right, Glenn.
I'm Glenn Sunshine. I'm a retired European historian from Central Connecticut State University. I'm a senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview, and I have my own ministry, Every Square Inch Ministries. The most interesting thing going on right now is I'm prepping to lead a tour in Ireland, historical tour in Ireland focused on Celtic Christianity. And if you're interested, you can find information on that on my website, esquareinch.org.
All right. Today we have Anthony Esolen on the show. Tony, it's great to have you. This is long overdue. We should have had you ages ago.
Oh, thanks.
But why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll jump into the subject of the day.
Well, right now, I'm a distinguished professor of humanities at Thales College in Wake Forest, North Carolina. Though I have to admit that I teach online. I live here in New Hampshire. We're a bit too old and crotchety to move. It's a wonderful startup college focused on the classics and the humanities and business. And I should also add, for the sake of people in the North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee areas, that there are now 12 Thales academies that are K through 12 schools that also focus on the same kind of curriculum, and a 13th school, St. Thomas More Academy, which is specifically Catholic, founded by the same founder, Bob Luddy, of Thales College. And these schools are doing very, very well. They, last time I was told, last year, they had 650 teachers hired.
Wow.
Now, you said this was in Wake Forest, North Carolina?
The college is located in Wake Forest, North Carolina. Don't be mistaken. It's not anywhere near Wake Forest University.
That's right. Yeah, I went to seminary. I lived in Wake Forest for a while, and then I went to Duke Divinity. So I know that area very well. So
the little village of Wake Forest, which is now a sprawling
cute little town.
That's about 15 miles north of Raleigh.
Nice. Yeah, it's a beautiful area.
It's a nice area, yeah. And I'm also a senior editor of Touchstone Magazine and author and translator of some 30 or so books, including The Hundredfold. If you want a book of Christian poetry, which is a single poem made up of 100 poems, lyrics, dramatic monologues, and hymns. In traditional meters, always. I don't do free verse. The Hundredfold is maybe something that you would like to take a look at. The dramatic monologues, all from speakers around, during, or shortly after the time of Christ. Okay.
Oh wow!
So, fun.
Anyway,
that's great.
My specialty back in the day was Renaissance literature, medieval literature, but since then I've written about a lot of things, Christian culture and so forth. But so that's me.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you have a Substack too.
Yeah.
And
Word and Song. So every week, every Monday there's Word of the Week, and this is a foray into the history of a word, its inner meanings, its relation to other words. It usually provides the theme for the week. This week's word is home. What does it mean? Where does it come from? And so on. Every Tuesday, the hymn of the week. Every Wednesday, and these are traditional hymns of a wide variety of styles, right? But traditional hymns. Wednesday's poem of the week. Thursday, film of the week. All from the classical age of films, the golden age. roughly 1935 to 1965. On Friday, typically a podcast, and on Saturday, my wife Deborah does sometimes a song. It's popular music from its golden age in America, or folk music.
Nice.
And these 6 things every week, paid subscribers get all of this. Free subscribers get a majority
Some of it.
Yeah.
Well, I was a freebie for a while, but I'm a paying member now.
Very good.
We expect you to be singing some classic folk songs there soon, Chris.
I'll make you sing an Italian folk song. That's right.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, some other interesting things about your background, though. You're a Princeton guy. That before that, you're from Eastern Pennsylvania, kind of the Scranton area.
Yeah.
And paradoxically, you're a Cardinal fan.
Yeah.
And that's a
diehard
big
Cardinals
baseball
fans.
fan.
Two of my cousins also Cardinals fans, and one of the 2 of the neighbor kids also Cardinals fans.
Really?
Yeah. So back in those days, in the late 60s, Cardinals had a terrific team, and
remember it.
They played the Mets. Starting in 1969, they played the Mets 18 times a year and played the Phillies 18 times a year. And we could get those on TV or the radio, those 36 games, easily. They played Pittsburgh 18 times a year, and you could pick up Pittsburgh on the radio at night. And they were a fun team to listen to or watch. And I could even pick up St. Louis from 1,500 miles away.
Yeah.
A powerful KMOX station. Late at night. So sometimes when I should have been in bed, pressing with the radio to the ear. And we're all Cardinals fans to this day.
That's great. I spent a little bit of time in St. Louis as a kid. My dad was at Washington U. And so we were, and that was in the early 70s. So not too long after you.
Right. I'm older than you are. Okay. All right.
Early 70s. I was just around.
That's right. I'm 62. But anyway, why don't we jump into some things here, Tony? Because the thing that inspired me to reach out to you was a couple of comments in our editors meeting at Touchstone. You were noting some things about artificial intelligence that I thought were worth thinking about. I don't know if you remember specifically what you were stating or saying at that point, but I know that you've got plenty of opinions about the technology, just generally speaking.
Yeah.
So why don't you go for it with it?
Right. Now when I...
That's okay. We
do have a dog in the background trying to protect us from some sort of unknown evil.
Right.
So when I try to do a search online, and I suppose we all must admit that we do these things, right? So the other day, I wanted to know what was the brightest magnitude for the planet Jupiter in the night sky. Jupiter's been extremely bright. And what was the maximum magnitude for Mars? Mars has been pretty bright, too. We've been having 4 planets in the early night sky, Saturn, Venus, Jupiter, and Mars. And instead of getting linked to an article, I get linked to AI's sort of boiling it all down. And I never click on that. I don't want any part of it. I go to some website or some article or other. But once you move away from such technical things, right, you basically look up an encyclopedia if you had one. You're using the computer there as just a big atlas or something like that, right? Once you go beyond that, though, we've got serious problems because we don't have, though it looks like we have, but we do not have the product of a human mind. We have a lot of stuff just simply boiled down by algorithms, all right? There is no wit in it, no humor, no real judgment. And it's presented to us in a somewhat of a deceptive way. That is, we see it as language. It looks like somebody is saying something to us, but nobody is saying anything to us. There's nobody there.
Yeah.
And if you get used to that, there are all kinds of harms that could happen. But if you get used to that, you will. I think that students are becoming incapable of reading a book, incapable even of actually entering into a human conversation.
Right.
You're starting to see this. You've got people at a restaurant; they're not looking at each other, they're not talking to each other. They're in front of their screens.
Yeah.
Right.
This is not. Uh, 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 this is not in its use. It is not more sophisticated technologically. It's a reduction. The most subtle and sophisticated technology that man has ever invented is simply the book.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because there you have the work of a human mind, translated, somehow transcribed into words on the page, but words that don't just deliver information. I hate the word. Words, they're not even words except in the context of sentences and a whole scene set by the author. What you're doing is entering into contact with another human mind, and you do so not deterministically. Okay, you allow the thoughts of that other human being to penetrate your own thoughts, and you make judgments about those thoughts. You puzzle about them. You say, well, I never thought of that, or that can't possibly be right, or I get the humor here. And it's again, the process is not like stamping something on a surface that'll take the impression. It's a technology that allows an encounter of a human mind with another human mind, after the human mind has sorted things out, sifted them, thought about things for a long time, and then presented them in a way to appeal to another human mind. And this can be done without constraints of space or time, so that Plato can speak to me. I can't speak back to Plato personally, but I can speak to his works personally. In fact, you can only encounter Plato personally, right? That's the most sophisticated, by far. Nothing else compares. The most sophisticated technology that we've invented. Nothing else is even on the same plane. And and whatever we do to make sure that young people or people in general will be less likely to use that technology, the more we make it difficult for them, because they'll be trained to go after what is quick, what has been digested for them, what is presented to them as intelligence, but is not. It's just boiling down by algorithm. The less human we make them. You can't even get intelligent conversations about subtle political matters online. It's not happening.
Right.
In my own experience, what I can say is that people who know me and who read my books will tell me that they hear my voice as they're reading it. So there is a different kind of encounter there. But as a professor, one of the things that really I found absolutely mind-boggling is toward the end of my career, I had assigned a partial text out of a book. They were going to read the whole book, but I assigned them just the first couple of chapters of a very short book. And when I came in to do a class discussion, nobody could answer even basic questions about it. And I was pretty upset. I admit. What I should have done, but I was kind of caught flat-footed. What I should have done is ask them if they had questions. I'm not sure I would have gotten an answer in any event.
Yeah.
But one of the students in the class was the daughter of one of my colleagues, and she told him, and I quote, the problem with Professor Sunshine is that he expects us to understand the things we read.
We were
that's
not
your
talking
problem,
about Kant's critique of pure reason here.
No,
That's right.
no. We were talking about a book on medieval magic.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, this was not a killer read here.
Yeah.
But there was an article in the Atlantic that came out I think it was the Atlantic, came out in, I think it was November, that was talking about students at an Ivy League school who all through their high school career had never read an entire book.
That's amazing. That's devastating to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was at Princeton, and I have a lot of severely critical things to say about Princeton, not because I didn't succeed there, because I did. But so this is not envy speaking. I'm summa cum laude. But one of the things that we sort of took for granted was that intelligent people read books. And not only did they read books in English, you would read books in other languages.
Yeah.
That was already beginning to fade at Princeton.
Yeah.
But when I went to North Carolina, UNC in Chapel Hill, the English department at that time in 1981 through 87, I was there. They required 2 languages of all doctoral students, and of people in the Renaissance and medieval studies, they required more.
Yeah.
And everybody just took that for granted. How can you be a student of the Middle Ages and not have the languages?
Yeah.
Right. Well, they got rid of that. They watered down, and then I think they've eliminated the requirement for master's students, eliminated entirely. For doctoral students, it may still be that you have to have one other language. I don't know. But they were already ditching those things in the early 90s. It's like confessing somehow that you're not entirely human in your intellect.
Right.
Yeah.
And it won't do here either to say, oh, well, a lot of cultures have never had books. Okay. All right, then, fine. We'll go from books to you're committing to memory thousands of lines of traditional songs.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Like memorizing, let's say, Paradise Lost, which I have somebody who is doing.
Which I am doing right now. I'm a little over 6,600 lines into it, with a little more than 3,800 lines to go. I'm nearing the very end of book 8.
Wow, that's tremendous. Well, but I think that demonstrates the capacity of our ability to remember, and it's something that often we're told artificial intelligence excels at, and therefore we should defer to it, because after all, why would anybody need to remember anything anymore if you have artificial intelligence to tell you what's out there?
That's insane, because there are so many things wrong with such a statement. It assumes that when a human being remembers, all it does is log a bit of data.
Yeah.
That's not true. So, for instance, I am committing to memory Paradise Lost. What does it involve? It involves, practically speaking, it involves my using my voice, because all of the senses are involved, right? I'm holding a book. I'm using my voice. I'm using my body as I use my voice, because in part I am impersonating a speaker. Okay. Even if the speaker is Milton speaking directly to us, descend from heaven, Urania, by that name, if rightly thou art called. And that gets into your whole person. Okay. You have a memory of not only speaking, but of hearing yourself speak, so that your own voice is a memory in your mind's ear. You can't commit these things to memory without calling back an entire scene, okay, a situation, a human situation. There is Adam, and the angel Raphael is speaking to him and has introduced the possibility to his mind that they might fall, and they should not. And Adam says, we cannot possibly desert his love. And Why did you add that caution? Son of heaven and earth, says Raphael, that thou art happy, O to God, that thou remain such, O to thyself, that is, to thy obedience, therein stand. This was that caution given thee. Be advised, God made thee perfect, not immutable, and good he made thee, but to persevere he left it in thy power, ordained thy will by nature free, not overruled by inexorable fate, by fate, or I'm botching a line there, sorry. But you get the idea, right? And
Right.
you assuming a personality there,
Right.
this was that caution given thee. Be advised, God made thee
Right.
perfect, not immutable. And now, what machine is going to do that for you?
Right. Right.
And then think, what's the difference between being perfect but mutable and being imperfect, or between being perfect and mutable and perfect and immutable? Raphael says the same thing of the angels too. Myself and all the heavenly powers that stand in sight of God enthroned, our happy state hold as you yours, while our obedience holds, on other surety none. Freely we serve because we freely love, as in our power to love or not. Therein we stand or fall, and some are fallen, to disobedience fallen, and so from heaven to deepest hell, O fall, from what height of bliss into what woe.
I'm reminded of all of the old preachers that I knew back in the day. So, I found myself as a teenager in a bad spot, but there were evangelical Protestants who reached out to me and took me in, and the old guys often had long stretches of the King James Bible committed to memory,
Right.
and just on the spot would be able to, just begin reciting, First Thessalonians or whatever, just, as the moment called for. They didn't need to reach for their Bible. They didn't need to guess. They didn't need to paraphrase.
And these percolated in their minds and formed their imaginations, so that they could easily move from one place in Scripture to another and weigh. And I mean, this is what we see the fathers of the church do in their sermons.
Right.
You can't get through a page of a sermon by Augustine without his dropping lines from 7 or 8 passages in Scripture.
Right.
Which he expects his hearers to
recognize.
Yeah.
So I'm reading the life. I'm working with Anthony right now, and Athanasius' Life of Antony. And here's a man who just is quoting scripture all over the place. Of course, this is Athanasius recalling Antony. So this is one step removed. But what he remembers of Antony is just how much Antony remembered. He had this vast reservoir of scripture that he could draw on by memory.
And Anthony was not an author.
Right.
This is just a man who's, I assume he was able to read, but he's not a scholar. He's not an author.
Mm-hmm. Right.
He's a listener, a rememberer. He's a human being.
Right.
I was afraid when when you go, even when you think you're only looking for some data online, it can't be trusted. On technical things like the range of the apparent magnitude of Jupiter in the sky, okay, I can trust them on that. But once you move away from that kind of thing, it can't be trusted at all. And yet people are going to rely on these. That means that they're all going, as I said someplace, they're all going to end up being stupid in the same way. Rather than as God intended us to be, which is stupid in a variety of ways.
So
Yeah, but
let's get into a little bit of the metaphysics of this, Tony, because
Yeah.
you noted that when you read an author, you read a book, you're interacting with, you're receiving something from another human being. But when we think about words more generally, or just logos, when we reflect on the divine logos or logos, there's something about reality itself that speaks, that reflects that word is the product of the word. And here we have these large language models which have mathematized everything and just are working with probabilities and thinking about what's the next likely word.
Yeah.
There's no consciousness. There's just probability at work. It's soulless. Is this a desecration, would you say?
I hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah, I guess it is. Um, it it would be a devastating rejection of the image of God in us, because God spoke us into being. He didn't type us into being on us.
yeah.
He spoke us into being, and when I first started to poke around a little bit in Hebrew, about 12 or so years ago, I learned that the word for word in Hebrew was what the Jews understood by the Ten Commandments, that they're the 10 Devarim, the 10 words.
Yeah.
And I thought, now Hebrew is so verbal that it's so much dependent upon verbs for its semantics, its lexicon, not on nouns, but on verbs. So that you often will have nouns derived from verbs rather than the other way around. That when they thought of the word davar, they were thinking not of an inanimate thing, such as a bunch of scrawls on a piece of papyrus. They were thinking of of a person speaking to a person.
Yeah.
The word was a speaking. It had verbal force. And all at once, then all kinds of things began to occur to me, right? It's hard for us to get that across in an English translation. In the beginning was the word.
Yeah.
In the beginning was an act of speaking into being by a person. There was no such thing as an impersonal word. But when we do our best to reduce words to impersonality, which is what happens in this AI stuff, that's to reduce the image of God in us, if that's possible to say without contradiction. It's to reject the image of God. It's to turn away, in fact, from bearers of God's image. And sure enough, people are less and less able to engage with the image of God in another person, less and less able simply to talk.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a terrible thing. I mean, we're trying to fight. At Word and Song, what we do is
let's get into that.
We introduce, and of course, I know we use the computer to do it, but we stay away from political wrangling. We certainly stay away from ecclesiological controversies. That's not our business. Other people will have that business, but that's not our business. We find in our time that people are so starved for beauty, even starved for intellectual fun, which is hardly to be had in any of our schools or colleges. Intellectual fun.
Right. It's all gone.
Yeah. So we say, well, we're going to give you these 5, 6 good things, that are related to truth and beauty. We're not going to preach sermons at you, though there may be a little bit of that now and then. But merely because these things are human, and if you believe, as I believe, that the grace of God builds upon the nature that God has Himself instilled in us, that then to reintroduce human beings to human things is, at the very least, it's propedeutic to introducing them to the Word of God. It's not introducing them to the Word of God, though I do a little bit of that, but it's essential, and it's a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It definitely people. I mean, I teach first year undergrads at a little Catholic school locally, and philosophy and intro to theology there. And one of the things is the philosophy department is shrinking. It's a very liberal school, and the philosophy department was shrinking. They kind of brought me in because they needed an extra teacher who could deal with it. But I did exactly what you're talking about. Instead of going with the way the textbook had laid it out, just as like epistemology, that you're very detached and you read a bunch of things that no first year student really wants to read.
Right.
But when I present that first lecture about basically being, and you have a part in this, this is participatory, and this has to do with everything about your existence and beauty. By the end of that course, the accolades for taking an intro to philosophy have never been complaints, but how much they've loved it.
Wow.
And they're starving for exactly what you're talking about. These things that cry out to our natures that we're meant to participate in, and we're in all these other, even educational vehicles, detach us from it. They make us not want to connect with it because it's looked at, I think, in these almost technological ways.
There's very little wonder to be had, and with that, there's also very little mirth. That's interesting, because Plato himself, I'm the greatest philosopher ever, perhaps, Plato could have taught them otherwise. And look how he frames the dialogue, the Phaedrus. There's Socrates and young Phaedrus, and they decide to stop and have a rest by the running stream, just on the outskirts of the city of Athens, and there have a conversation about, love, right? And the whole human scene is crucial for that, you know? That's a work of wonder. It's not Anglo-American analytic philosophy gone insane.
That stuff's horrendous.
Now, you know what, though? We are finding also that young people, but then more than young people, all people, they don't know even such things as film. You think, everybody watches television, everybody watches movies, but the diet that they've been fed in the last at least 30 years more has been a diet of anger, flippancy, political correctness, dystopia, misery, harshness, vengeance, and the delights of vengeance, lust. It's all. I mean, it would turn something mirthful like A Midsummer Night's Dream into the Amityville Horror set in a bathhouse.
So as I reflect on the trends, Tony, I see a couple of things. One is, these base drives sort of coming to the surface and kind of being the thing that film and books and television and everything seems to be, caught up with. But then the other thing is the politicization of everything. You noted political correctness. I was just thinking about the fact the other day that a lot of young women who go to college often are lovers of literature. And because that's the case, because maybe they've read, some Jane Austen. They
Right.
think, I want to study this. And then the people into whose hands they're given politicize everything and make them haters of basically
Yeah.
their own society.
Yeah.
And they shave their heads and they become ugly themselves. And it's
purple hair and
yeah.
And,
Can you reflect on this a little bit,
Yeah.
Tony? I know you got a lot of thoughts on it.
Yeah, I've had some experience with it.
Yeah, I know.
I think of an anecdote. This happened to me and to one of my colleagues at Providence College, where I taught for 27 years till that blew up.
Right.
And I was happy for almost all of those 27 years. But in any case, we were teaching the freshmen. We had a freshman section of our Development of Western Civilization course. All the students all sophomores, all freshmen had to take this 5-hour-a-week course, right? So it was taught with teams of professors, a theology person in English, history, and philosophy. So I was there with a good friend of mine who's in theology. And one of his seminar students, we divided the kids up into smaller groups once a week, came to him almost in tears. In fact, she then did start to cry because she loved fairy tales. And there was a class being offered through the Women's Studies program on fairy tales. And she says, well, I like fairy tales, so I take the course. Well, it turns out that the person who taught the course hates fairy tales. And she is an angry, embittered feminist, and she hates what she teaches. Okay, she teaches what she hates. So the girl was being led to detest these things. This is all patriarchal. This is about the suppression of women's sexuality. La 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 la. And she didn't know what to do. It was the middle of her first semester in college. And so she sought some advice. And my friend brought her to me, too. And she asked my advice, right? And I said, well, we're already more than halfway through the term. Stick the course out. Just stick with it. Put up with it. Okay? And then never take a course like that again. Because, and I spoke to her, I said, ultimately, what some of these people are about is not just detesting human fathers and nature. Whether they know it or not, they're set against the Father.
Yeah. Right.
These are beautiful folk tales. They are the common heritage of mankind. If you don't like these ones in Germany, then you're not going to like the ones in Japan or China or India either, because everywhere you go, you've got stories like these, right? And everywhere you go, the men and the women in such stories are the same, right? Because the folk are just building upon nature. So I said, just to be wary of it. And remember, I'm not saying that the professor understands herself as doing this, but the ultimate effect is to detach people from the fatherhood of God.
Right.
So it turned out that she decided to drop the course, and the professor called her in. Say, why are you going to drop the course? And she said, I'm dropping it because I talked to my professors, and I'm not happy. And this is what one of my professors said. That women's studies professor held a grudge against my friend. And when he was up for promotion, which he very much needed because he was the sole support of his family, he needed the extra money. And then she laid it on at the faculty meeting that was, to decide upon his promotion, which meant money, that she doubted whether he had the capacity to teach female students because of this brew of Catholicism that he believed and so forth. She never went to him to talk about it, but she held a grudge.
Yeah.
And he had to sweat it out. He was given his promotion in the end.
Yeah.
And I said to
That's
myself, well, this is not to be surprised at, because when people have to defend something that's not natural, or when they're attacking something that's perfectly natural, perfectly innocent and sweet in this case,
right.
They somewhere in themselves they know that they're on shaky ground, and they have to hide, and then they have to use institutional force.
Yeah.
They can't use argument; they're going to lose.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I have always told my students to stay far away from any professor who seems at all to hate what he has to teach. Just forget about it.
Yeah.
Don't even bother.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah,
Right.
Get out of there.
Yeah, which of course raises the question in any sane person's mind: why is that person still teaching that stuff?
Well, go back to something we were talking about earlier. Why would you do a program in medieval studies that doesn't require you to know Latin or the other languages there? I mean, that seems to me a way of holding the entire field in contempt. What you are studying, you don't care enough about to read it the way they wrote it, because no matter how good the translation is, it always is going to screw it up.
Hey, you're talking to a big-time translator here.
Nothing personal, Tony, but you're never going to get all the nuance.
I admit it. You know what? The classics and medieval studies, with Renaissance studies a little bit in the neighborhood too, they were the last to go corrupt in the academy, or in that part of the academy, because the necessity to actually know things, right? To know history, to be able to read the language, and so on, right? That necessity kept the poseurs away. It kept people honest, right? I mean, when you've got, for instance, to know a little bit about how people actually wrote things down and how manuscripts got copied, and you have to know things. You can't just go on and on politically. You're going to be shown up to be a simpleton if you don't have the languages. That shielded them from a lot of this for a long time. No more. Because now that sort of expertise is no longer expected. And and those studies are just as corrupt as all the other studies now.
Yeah, I was trained as an archival historian. I studied medieval paleography. I studied, I got pretty good at 16th century Genevan shorthand. I had to learn all this stuff, but that was the nature of what I was doing, what I was trying to do, and as an undergrad, you can read things in translation and it works fine. But when you're dealing with it at a higher level, there are basic skills you got to have. Language is one of them. And if you're doing what I was doing, archival history, there are other skills you have to have. And if you don't have them, you can't do it.
I told my students in the medieval literature class that I'm teaching at Thales right now that if on their papers they are going to be analyzing the use of a word, okay, maybe the same word pops up in a couple of different places, but I say, look, you have translations here. Translation from Old French or Italian or the Middle English of the Gawain poet, okay? You've got to go to the originals to check. And I asked them, how many of you have some knowledge of a Romance language or of Latin? One. It's a small class. It's a very small class. Any of you study French? No. Bit of Spanish, no. Bit of German, forget that. No, German's just dropped out of existence in our schools.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was writing in my dissertation 2003-05, and I did it at Oxford on modern theology on Karl Barth's untranslated works. And they had in UK it was a little different than the system here, but you had to there. It was assumed you had to know how to work the language. Otherwise, you weren't tested. I remember the programs here you had to test for them, but I think that dropped out. I don't remember when, but I think they did. But I remember in my dissertation defense that one of the internal readers bringing down with their long cape the dogmatics in German and making me on the spot translate the pages. And that was part of passing.
Wow.
And I have not heard even people studying that level, that time of German theology having to do it anymore. I don't even think it's done. I don't even know if it's done there still.
You know, you put me in mind of something. In the from about, I guess, 1925 or so to it started to get bad around 1970. Doubleday Books used to have a Catholic imprint called Image Press, and they published novels, histories, philosophy, theology, and so forth. Right, a lot of the great classics. One of the works they published under the imprint was the book that came from Fulton Sheen's dissertation at the Louvain, okay, on the idea of God in modern philosophy. Right?
Yeah.
Now, I have that book here among my 9,000 books. That it's a great book. Okay, Sheen was the top student at the Louvain. We mustn't think of him just as a popularizer. He was a man of first-rate intellect.
Wow.
And that book has longish passages of Latin and French, which are, many of them are not translated.
Yeah.
Okay. Like you may encounter a passage in French in one of the Victorian writers like Matthew Arnold or John Henry Newman. They're not going to translate that for you.
That's right. That's right.
I find similar passages in the Atlantic Monthly, not these days. No, this is July through December of 1869. Okay, and
they assume
they
assume they can read it. Yeah, they will not translate them. That's fascinating.
Yeah, well, so they consider it kind of an insult to your intelligence. So.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So, Tony, where should you or where should we look for some maybe positive trends? So, the school you're teaching at sounds like it's a good place.
Let me kind of first finish a thought that I think I forgot to finish. Okay. This is why, since people are exposed to so much misery by way of television and films, this is why we've gone back to that golden age. And there are reasons why it was a golden age. It's not just saying, "Oh, I happen to like those." There were identifiable reasons, cultural and artistic, why it should have occurred then. Okay, and why it petered out. In any case, you can get people. Some people you can get by film. Well, you should get them. Okay.
Yeah.
What trends are encouraging? It does seem to me that the classical schools, right? What's called classical schools right now is all that is what we would have called schools that focus on the humanities, on arts and letters, right?
Yeah.
So we're not talking about in-depth study of Latin or Greek. These are just schools, such as schools all used to be.
Yeah.
Okay?
Right.
And that movement is picking up steam. The homeschooling movement is chugging along quite well, and now is merging with that. this is in various Christian denominations. It's also in the Catholic Church. Most of the new Catholic schools are classically oriented and are, for somewhat predictable reasons, often not associated with the diocese. They're independent.
Right.
So that they
This,
can
by the
avoid
way,
the...
this, by the way, might be helpful information for people in our audience. So we have a lot of Reformed folks, a lot of sort of mainstream evangelicals. We have Catholics and Orthodox people listen to us as well. But I think a lot of the people who are outside of Catholicism, when they look in on it, they think of it as sort of a homogenous thing, that everybody's on the same page. But I try to share it. Well, no, there actually is a very strong Catholic homeschooling movement because people don't trust the diocese and the parochial schools anymore.
No, the parochial schools started to mimic all of the bad ideas of the public schools. The teaching orders of sisters got the feminist bug and they all died. There are new teaching orders, though, that are faithful and good. They're solid. But they're still trying to struggle against the old institutional weight that drags them against any good thing that they can do. A lot of these schools are happy if the diocese will simply ignore them. Because the more likely thing is that they will subtly or overtly oppose them.
Right.
And I imagine that similar things happen across Christian denominations.
We see that in the Reform world as well.
I'm also starting to see some little bit of sanity entering into discourse about education. Teachers maybe finally getting the idea that it was really stupid to put a computer screen in front of every student.
Right.
It was the stupidest thing they could possibly do and the most expensive, and therefore they did it.
If it's stupid, they're going to run with it.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, you can
because
get money
they haven't read.
you can get grants to do that, and everybody knows if you can get a grant, you're going to do it.
And the neurologists, I wish. Everything's supposed to be about the science. Nobody listens to what neurologists have to say about this issue, because they can tell you, right, that what you're looking at on the screen, right, your senses are not fully engaged. Your eyes are engaged, but even they are not fully engaged.
Yeah.
With a book, your eyes, your hands, your body, your memory of what you see on a distinct page with its distinct characteristics, right? Yeah. These things enter powerfully into you in a way that words on the screens do not, and students tend to forget what they've seen on the screen. We tend to read in a slovenly and hasty way what we see on a screen.
Yeah, that's certainly true for me.
But there's and so maybe they'll finally get the idea through their thick. Sorry, I don't.
Well, I'd like to kind of throw a curveball in here too. Go ahead, Glenn.
There is one other really positive thing going on. There are a number of states that are banning cell phones in classrooms.
Yeah.
That is, I think, a genuinely positive move.
Yeah. One of the themes that I know is dear to your heart is kind of the blue collar sort of approach to life, and kind of working with your hands and knowing kind of what it's like to have to earn your living by actually using your hands. And I know it has a lot to do with your background in Eastern Pennsylvania and stuff like that. But one of the things I've noticed that has encouraged me is a lot of those guys, younger men in their 20s and 30s, because the entertainment industry and higher education have turned so hard against traditional masculinity that these guys have more or less just said, okay, fine, I'm just going to read classics, and I'm just going to read old stuff. And they're actually doing that more and more. And of course, it's alarmed certain people. But can you reflect a little bit upon that kind of development?
It alarms all the right people.
That's right.
Oh Lord, what will happen now? I'm glad to hear that. So you were telling me about something that I didn't know, and I'm delighted to hear it. It reminds me of a poem that I found in one of my copies of the Century magazine. See, I collect old popular magazines. Typically 6 months will be published at a time, and a thing like this about 1,000 pages. My favorite is the Century magazine in its heyday, from about 1870 to about 1900, and in this sonnet, a father is musing upon his son. So the son is about 12 years old. His son, who is in his study, he's in dad's study, and he's picked up Plutarch. And the son is reading Plutarch. And the father writes a sonnet about observing the son reading Plutarch for the first time and what that's like.
Yeah.
And the last line of the poem is wonderfully colloquial, right? My son will get him something worth his while. It's a really fine poem, right? You go from these heroic deeds, right? He's going to be reading about Pericles. He's going to be reading about Julius Caesar, right? Mm-hmm. And then tongue in cheek with devastating understatement.
Right.
My son will get him something worth his while.
That's great.
So, guys, if you, the more you can be like that 12-year-old boy in that man's study.
Yeah.
By the way, the man was not a college professor. He was not an author by trade. I believe he was some kind of statesman. I can't remember now offhand. But of course, he had a study full of great books, and he dabbled a little bit in poetry. And his son was reading Plutarch's Lives.
That's great.
That's great.
Can't get better than that. Well, you can get better than that, but he's on the right.
That's not bad.
We know what you mean.
Okay.
So we're getting to a point where we should wrap some things up here, Tony. So, is there anything that maybe you'd like to leave folks with, and just in the way of like what you're working on and where people can follow you, and maybe things you'd like to see people do more of or less of, or I think we've gotten some of that.
Well, I've dropped the hint for my book of poems that is a single poem, The Hundredfold, and I guess we dropped mention of my having translated Augustine's Confessions. If you like Dante, I've got a translation to recommend to you.
The Confessions is in paperback now.
The Confessions is now in paperback. Okay, all right.
Good. I've been reading it, so I have to get that one.
And yours truly had to do the notes, too. They said after I did the translation, they said, people are not going to find this as useful as they could find it unless there are notes. So could you write the notes? And that took me almost as long as it took to do the translation. There's that, and then there's a Substack Word and Song, which we really
we'll be sure to link that.
It's a full-time job.
I'd like to join in on that.
It's a 6-day-a-week thing, a literary magazine, right?
But it's
it is. Yeah.
I want to suggest what you said, Chris, about working, with your hands, and that bringing these people back to some of these guys back to the classics. One of the things that I thought was constitutive of that golden age of Hollywood was that the actors and the actresses, but now we focus particularly on the male, on the actors. Those guys, almost all of them, knew what hard manual labor was from having done it themselves, when they were young, or having watched their fathers, their uncles, their older brothers. They were around it constantly. And a lot of them were around it also in its form as military service.
Right.
Okay? They were not divorced from the natural world.
Yeah.
Right.
That changes by the time you hit the 70s.
Yeah.
That's no longer true. Okay. But it's
Yeah, like
certainly true of people like James Stewart and John Wayne and
Charles Bronson.
Right.
Remember Bronson? He was a coal miner, if I remember correctly, in central Pennsylvania. But anyway, so well, this is great stuff, Tony. Thank you for your time.
I think
I
Glenn
want to
has
mention one more.
Yeah.
In the beginning was the Word.
Yeah. That's your book there, Tony.
Annotated reading of the prologue of John. Wonderful little book.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It opens up all kinds of new ways of thinking about that prologue.
Nice.
So,
hey, it's like we all belong to the same church.
Amen to that. All right.
Amen.
Yeah.
All right.
And
Well,
just
thanks,
the prologue,
Tony.
just the whole book, because line by line, word by word.
Yeah, that's great stuff. Anyway, for those of you out there in Pugcast land, thank you for listening to this episode, making it all the way to the end. And we're glad to have had Tony with us today, and we have some links in the show notes. We really encourage you to check those out. But also, we're grateful that we've got a number of people who support the show. We've got a Patreon, like just about everybody in the world does. We don't take any money from it, but it does pay the bills to have the shows edited and our website and all of that. So if you'd like to help us out by becoming a patron, we'd appreciate it. Anyway, that's it for now. Thanks a lot, and bye-bye.
Bye.
right.